Welcome back, Treasure Valley. Once again, we are here with Dr. Greg Hampikian, and we were just talking about, just lightly brushing over the Idaho Innocence Project.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about that? And
Sure.
Time is so limited, we've just made an executive decision. We're going to do a couple of segments with you and show them later on in the show. So talk to me just a little bit, we're honored, a little bit about the Idaho Innocence Project.
Sure. So the Idaho Innocence Project is part of the Innocence Network. So that's organizations all over the United States and overseas that work to free people who are incarcerated and are innocent.
And on death row.
Death row, some of the cases.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember how many have been freed from death row. I believe it's more than a dozen through our efforts. But if you look at everyone's efforts since we started the death penalty in 73, was it? There have been more than 130 people freed from death row, like found innocent. And here in Idaho, we have one who's a friend of mine, in fact.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's kind of a great No, were you part of that one?
I was not. It happened just before I arrived here in Idaho. Fred Hoops was his lawyer in town, he in Idaho, and he helped free Charles Fain, who was on death row in Idaho.
How long was he?
17 years.
Well, that seems to be like a magic number, that 17.
I've worked on a number of cases that are people in prison for 17 years. I don't know.
What the magic number is.
It's a coincidence, but maybe you're right.
Maybe not. So Idaho Innocence Project, how did it start and what is it all about?
It started with students at the University of Idaho Law School. Before I got to the state, I was in Georgia with the Georgia Innocence Project. And when I moved here to Boise State University, our president, Bob Custra, was interested in supporting that work, and so was Michael Hoffman in town, the great film director and a philanthropist, and he helped me get it started here. And then eventually we were able to raise enough resources to say, well, why don't we move the center of operations here and still bring in law students as interns. And that's what we do. So we have a staff attorney that I've been able to hire, Richard Visser, on campus. And
but what does it do? I mean, what is the substance
behind
it? You're welcome. I'm like, I'm so interested in finding out what it is.
Yeah, well, so we receive letters from prisoners in
Okay.
Idaho and sometimes around the country or even the world.
Oh, wow.
But we focus on Idaho or Northwest cases, and they write to us and say, I'm innocent, can you help me? And we have a form
How do you
that we
pick
send out to
those?
them.
I mean, if they're all, I would imagine that, and we were talking about that before, how difficult it has to be on death row or even in prison, and you're trying to make somebody understand, I didn't do it. I wasn't even there. I had nothing, and I'm on death row.
Yeah, I mean, those are my nightmares. I can't imagine what.
So do you just throw them in a hat and pick one out and go to work on it, or how do you
It's slightly
pick
better
those?
than that,
Oh,
but
okay,
it's very difficult.
Yeah.
We have a rubric that we apply. We look at, one, there has to be an absolute claim of innocence. It can't be, well, I was there, I had a gun, someone else pulled the trigger.
Right.
It can't be just a legal argument, but there's places that will handle that. We don't handle that.
Right.
So there has to be a chance that we judge that there's new evidence to test. And that's a very hard decision.
Innocence. I mean, providing there is still evidence
and that takes years often to uncover, just to find out what evidence was saved from a case that's 10, 20, 30 years old.
That stuff isn't even saved.
That's right. There's no law in Idaho for preservation of biological evidence.
What do we need to do to get that done?
We have proposed.
I hope you're watching Idaho.
Yeah, please.
Hello.
We've proposed legislation. There's been some interested people here who have agreed to help sponsor legislation, and it's legislation that's typical. There's more than 24 states that have this type of legislation. So we're looking to give uniform instruction to law enforcement about what should they save. And we surveyed all of the law enforcement agencies in the state of Idaho.
Okay.
And part of that survey was, would you like to have more uniform guidelines for collecting and preserving evidence? And they all said yes. And then we supplied for them little cards laminated cards from the state lab, the state crime lab, how to preserve evidence.
And with that evidence, then you're able to move forward, pick some of these letters, and then maybe be able to get them out of prison.
The thing is, my goal, I mean, this is my life here,
Hello.
right? So my goal is to to find the evidence and get it tested.
Okay.
And what it tells us, it tells us. And frankly, I'm just as happy when it confirms guilt as when it doesn't.
Right, so that you can absolutes.
So that we get an answer.
Absolutely.
And
you know what,
that's the
Treasure Valley,
frustration.
we are going to, I said only 2, but we are going to do a 3rd because we need to come back and talk about some drugs and what's going
Yeah.
on in here, what you're discovering. So hold on, we've got a lot more information for you. We promise we'll keep it going with Greg, Dr. Hampikian, but we'll be right back after these commercial breaks.